Welcome back, everyone. We are continuing our broadcasts 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, on the coronavirus, the CCP virus. Now, of course, here still filming from my apartment in Queens, New York. And we're going to start today by talking about Chinese Communist Party propaganda and subversion. Now, you may remember the other day we talked about this journalist with Phoenix TV who had this, say, minor conflict with President Trump during one of these virus press briefings. And we talked about how this individual said that they're not owned by China, that Phoenix TV is not owned by China. But Phoenix TV in reality has very close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, particularly the Ministry of State Security, which is like a combination of the CIA and FBI for the Chinese regime. Now, another incident like this has taken place.
Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We know many people around the world are paying close attention to this press conference. So on behalf of
Good. Where are you from?
Media,
Where are you from?
I'm from Taiwan.
Good.
Yes.
Now, Jennifer Zhang, she's a reporter with our sister media, NTD Television. She noted on Twitter, quote, when Donald Trump asked Ching Yi Chang where he comes from, he said Taiwan. Actually, he works for Dargon Television in Shanghai, China, although he was born in Taiwan. Now, this is again raising ongoing questions of how are these journalists being selected for this very small pool allowed to attend these virus press briefings right now when the Chinese regime is trying to push its propaganda abroad and uses media very much like these to push its narratives. Keep in mind that the State Department listed 5 different Chinese state-run news outlets as official foreign missions of the Chinese Communist Party. And when it comes to these press briefings, a few of you have asked why Epoch Times is not in them. Well, Epoch Times does have White House reporters. We do have reporters at the White House. But because of these social distancing rules, they limited the number of reporters who can get into these virus briefings with Trump. And who chooses who gets in and who doesn't? Well, it's the press pool, the press association. And the press association is controlled by these news outlets. Of course, we were not chosen, but this does raise a question, while we were not chosen, many other media were not chosen, why are these Chinese news outlets, these actual news outlets from the mainland, allowed into these press briefings? That said, let's go into another issue with propaganda. Now, Taiwan did an investigation and found that 70% of fake news on this virus on the internet is coming from mainland China. The Chinese regime is pushing this propaganda campaign very aggressively right now. You may remember, actually, we talked about it on this show. The Epoch Times actually got leaked documents from China from one of their propaganda departments. It showed that to help with the propaganda around this Wuhan coronavirus, the CCP virus, just in Wuhan, they had hired 1,600 new staff. And included in this operation was the commission of influencer articles. In other words, they got influential names. Don't know who they were, just says the names. 300 to 400 commissioned propaganda from these influencers. And how they also got the Chinese regime's 50-cent army to go and write comments on them. 50-cent army is a branch of the Chinese regime's system for propaganda. The 50-cent army is the name they use for these Chinese internet trolls. You may see them in the comment section actually on this page. If you pay hard enough attention to it, you may see them all over Twitter. Any kind of influential tweet is going to have many individuals pushing the Chinese regime's propaganda. That is the 50-cent army. Not all of them, but many of them. Now, getting in next, we're talking about human rights abuses. The Epoch Times just received another leaked document. This comes from the 610 office in Harbin, China. Now, the 610 office, what is it? This is basically it's an extrajudicial Chinese law enforcement agency. They're basically like the Chinese regime's Gestapo. They were created specifically to persecute Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. Now, long story short, Falun Gong is a Chinese Qigong practice, similar to like Tai Chi, or you could say Chinese yoga. A lot of Chinese practice these slow movements in the park. Falun Gong was the most popular practice in China for that. A lot of people did it for health benefits. Falun Gong was different in that it never charged for classes, and it also had a moral component based in being honest, kind, and tolerant. truthfulness, compassion, forbearance. Now, the Chinese regime declared it was a threat to the atheistic rule of the Communist Party back in 1999, after it determined that there were between 70 million and 100 million people practicing, more people than there are Communist Party members. So what happens? Jiang Zemin, the head of the Chinese Communist Party at the time, says wipe it out. He said prove there's something wrong with it. He sent out people to find things. They did not find anything. He said prove it's a cult. They came back and said it's not a cult. Not only that, but it's actually beneficial. It's actually beneficial to the country because it's lowering healthcare costs and it's improving social stability because people were being kinder to each other. And he said persecute it anyway. And so the Chinese regime set off a campaign of torture, arrests, abuse, murder, you name it. Re-education through labor. Epoch Times exposed, going back I think 2006, which is now publicly proven, that the Chinese regime has been using Falun Gong practitioners and other religious believers as living sources for organ transplants. We've been exposing this from the get-go. And so now we've got a leaked document from this 610 office, the special office assigned to carry out the persecution. And it notes that the annual salary of these 610 officers is about 200,000 yuan. Now in China, 100,000 yuan is a really, really, really high pay, let alone 200,000 yuan. And the document also says that they have close to 1 million yuan assigned to this office that they can use for whatever they want. And now the document also has names of about a dozen officers who work there. The Epoch Times will be investigating these individuals. It's very likely they can be found guilty of crimes against humanity and sued in international courts. So we'll keep you updated on that. Meanwhile, also on the issue of human rights, Africans, black Africans, are being sent out on the streets in China, particularly in Guangzhou province. The CCP held mass evictions of black Africans from hotels and apartments. This came after online rumors were going around that they were spreading the virus, that they had the virus. This led to door-to-door testing, according to BBC, evictions, and alleged forced quarantine. Now, individuals told BBC, they say, we have no house, no food, no hotel. And in a written statement, the Nigerian embassy in Beijing, according to BBC, said the federal government was now prepared to evacuate its citizens from China. So the Nigerian government is stepping in to help these individuals get out of China and out of the state they're in currently. On to some of the issues with Chinese technology. Quite a few interesting things happening right now. First up, there's a tech company in Israel that is accusing Huawei of violating their copyright. And how does Huawei respond? They accuse this Israeli company of violating their copyright. Now, this is standard practice not just for Chinese regime companies, but for the Chinese regime itself. You can usually tell what the Chinese regime is doing by what it accuses other people of doing, because usually it accuses others of exactly whatever it is doing. For Huawei, this is not the first time it has done this. Notably, 2016, Apple filed a lawsuit against Huawei for ripping off the iPhone. Huawei copied it down to the last screw. And what does Huawei do? Well, it was a bit of a, say, underhanded move. A Chinese phone company that nobody had ever heard of came out and sued Apple in China, saying Apple had infringed their copyright. Meanwhile, Zoom, this video conferencing software that's kind of being hit right now for many controversies, one of them being the fact that it was routing data through China and not being completely clear about its security protocols. In addition to that, of course, individuals being able to go on, say, online classrooms and posting illicit images. But the bigger thing they're facing right now is the fact that they've been routing people's data through Chinese servers. They came out and admitted it. And now Zoom is being sued in a class action lawsuit for this by one of its own shareholders. And also, U.S. agencies are calling on the FCC to ban China Telecom from operating in the United States. NTD News, sister media of Epoch Times, had a good story on this. They note, the U.S. Department of Justice and other federal agencies on April 9 urged the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to revoke Chinese state-owned company China Telecom's authorization to provide international telecommunication services in the United States. Now keep in mind the three main Chinese telecommunication companies, Huawei, ZTE, and now China Telecom, have all been called out for security issues, for national security threats. This follows some other moves against Huawei. Huawei has, of course, been indicted for many different, say, illicit issues and many different controversies. And the Trump administration now is considering, allegedly, banning it from purchasing chips from Taiwan. Now China, the Chinese regime, cannot produce its own computer chips. It needs to import these from other countries, at least not current generation's computer chips. And without these chips, Huawei, one of the largest telecommunication companies in the world, becomes just another, say, third-rate telecom company without any ability to produce any kind of high technology. It is like, it's the equivalent of putting all of your money and your entire career into developing iPhone apps, and suddenly you can't use an iPhone anymore. Denying Huawei these chips would have the same effect. And Huawei, notably, is also a core part of the Chinese regime's One Belt, One Road initiative, which is part of their 2025 initiative, China 2025. And this is how they're going into Latin America, into Africa, and into other countries, and they're getting these countries into debt traps. And they're installing Chinese telecommunication systems, 5G, you name it, and getting these countries into situations that they can never get out of. In Sri Lanka, they were saying that they were going to wake up one day and realize they'd become a vassal state of the Chinese Communist Party if they allow these practices to continue. Without Huawei, they lose one of the backbones of that system. Now, getting into the United Nations and the World Health Organization. First off, the United Nations Secretary General is now saying that after this global pandemic is over, they're going to launch an investigation into the origin of the virus and how it grew so quickly, how it spread so quickly. We'll have to see. It seems many countries are now interested in looking into where this virus came from. That said, folks, actually, if you haven't seen it yet, the Epoch Times produced an investigative documentary. I was actually the main investigative reporter in it, where we look into the origin of this virus. You can find it in our video section. Full story, looking into where this virus came from, looking into these Chinese labs, looking into the history of the research they were doing, and looking into the virus sequence and what it tells us. I think you'll all find it very interesting. Tedros, the head of the WHO, I'm sure you've all seen all the pressure he's under right now, calls to resign. WHO is being called out for this conference call one of its top members had with this Chinese journalist, where when she brought up Taiwan, he pretended to not hear the question. When she pressed him again, he said, "Let's move on to another question." When she asked him again, he ended the phone call.
Will the WHO consider Taiwan's membership? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
Now, Tedros is, of course, being accused of many things right now. One of them being pandering to the Chinese Communist Party and covering up the spread of this outbreak in line with what the Chinese Communist Party was saying very early on, which left much of the world unprepared for what this virus really was. Now, Tedros, what is he doing when he's accused of this? Well, he's coming out and is accusing Taiwan of being racist. He's saying Taiwan is launching a racist campaign against him. Now, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen came out and responded with a statement, and here's what she said. For years, Taiwan has been excluded from international organizations, and we know better than anyone else what it feels like to be discriminated against and isolated. If Director General Tedros could withstand pressure from China and come to Taiwan to see our efforts to fight COVID-19 for himself, he would see that the Taiwanese people are the true victims of unfair treatment. Notably, Taiwan has been trying to get access to the WHO so it can have more information on this virus. It has been repeatedly denied. And notably, too, if Taiwan were allowed access to these international organizations, which the Taiwanese president is noting that they cannot get access to, it would validate Taiwan as a legitimate country in the international community. And the Chinese regime does not want that. They call it China's Taiwan, even though they are an independent country. And also, following the WHO, Nature magazine, the science magazine that was originally talking about the virus sequence and really providing some great research on it, has now done a 180 on us. And they're now apologizing for linking the virus, the CCP virus, to China. This was not controversial before this whole thing turned into some race debate. Most of the mainstream news outlets are calling this the Wuhan coronavirus. In fact, even the Chinese regime was calling it around this early on. They had even stamps they've recalled commemorating the virus that have Wuhan buildings on it. They've all changed that narrative. WHO changed the narrative. Now Nature magazine is following that change in narrative and apologizing for the previous reporting, even though they're even though they're a science magazine, allegedly. Now they're saying that since the WHO changed the name to COVID-19, it was a reminder, quote, to those who had erroneously been associating the virus with Wuhan and with China in their news coverage, including Nature. It's clear that since the outbreak was first reported, people of Asian descent around the world have been subjected to racist attacks with untold human costs, for example on their health and livelihoods. Now, of course, there are reports of Chinese individuals being attacked, possibly for racism around this virus. Let's be clear about something. The Chinese Communist Party is the biggest abuser of the Chinese people. The Chinese people are the biggest victims of the Chinese Communist Party. Under Mao Zedong alone, the Chinese regime killed between 50 million and 70 million Chinese people. The Chinese regime, the Chinese Communist Party, in its cultural revolution and other movements, destroyed China's cultural heritage. It destroyed their dance cultures. It destroyed relics. It destroyed artifacts. It destroyed everything they had. The Chinese regime is an abuser of the Chinese people. As we speak right now, there are Muslim Uyghurs in Chinese concentration camps. As we speak right now, Christians are having their temples torn down. Falun Gong practitioners are being used as living sources for organ transplants. You talk about Tibetan Buddhists. You talk about democracy activists. You talk about people who even try to speak openly on the internet. The Chinese regime is abusive of its own people, and its cover-up of this virus allowed this virus to spread not just through China, but around the world. The Chinese regime is partly responsible for this, and not calling it out on this, even as a science magazine, allegedly. Instead of following the facts, instead of reporting the facts, instead pandering to political interests. That is not science. We'll have to see how reliable their stuff is going forward. They actually did publish a new paper saying now that this virus is not lab-derived. And if you read this paper, it is not a science paper. It is an opinion article. It notes even research suggesting that this comes from a Chinese lab and draws conclusions not based on science, but mostly based on personal opinion. And of course, contradicting other research that has come out. You can watch our documentary, actually, which I mentioned already, which goes very deep into this. And now for some news from outside of China. Epidemiologists in Paris and the health ministry are saying that their patient zero in Paris has interesting ties, close ties to China. Also, police in Florida are starting to use talking drones to enforce self-quarantine. I noted in the last episode how Italy had begun doing this. They have these unmanned aerial vehicles, these drones, going around and shouting obscenities at people who violate the quarantine. And I noted this is following the Chinese regime's model of what they've been doing to enforce this quarantine. Personally, I think it's a slippery slope. Personal analysis. Mainly because you start creating these forms of high-tech policing, which the Chinese regime uses. I think it's a slippery slope, personally. I mentioned that this is following the China model. Also, in the United States, 2 individuals are being charged with terrorist crimes over threats to spread the CCP virus. These 2 cases are in Texas and in Florida, and they're being charged with terrorism on grounds that this virus is a biological agent. Now, the Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen wrote in a memo, quote, "Threats or attempts to use COVID-19 as a weapon against Americans will not be tolerated." Now, in China, notably, intentionally spreading the virus was a death sentence. There were some videos circulating in the U.S. of individuals going around and apparently, possibly intentionally spreading the virus. There was one of appears to be a Chinese woman going door to door. There was a security camera footage that caught her going door to door, licking her fingers and licking doorknobs. There were videos of individuals in, say, computer stores going computer to computer, touching every one of them in very strange ways. Some videos suggesting people are intentionally coughing or sneezing on produce in supermarkets. This, of course, started a lot of speculation that maybe the Chinese regime or another country is paying individuals to intentionally spread this virus. And very often these individuals are seen carrying cups while they did it. Who knows? All rumors at this point. But it is interesting to see that the United States is charging individuals who do this, at least if they are spreading it intentionally, with terrorism. Now, in other news, you might remember I talked about these reports in New York that they're running out of room in the morgues. And there were suggestions that they would begin using New York City parks for mass burials, for mass graves. Now, there's a drone video footage showing what appears to be the digging of a mass grave, what appears to be wooden coffins stacked up on each other inside of it, and what appear to be workers dressed in full medical garb, the safety garb. Unclear exactly what is going on in this. It does appear that is what's taking place. Now, notably, this footage is on Hart Island in New York, which is where they bury unidentified or unclaimed bodies. Who knows what's really going on? There's not been verification that that's what's happening, that these are victims of this CCP virus. Keep you updated on that. But the Army Mortuary Unit is now deploying to New York City to help handle human remains. There's a quote here. Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy confirmed Wednesday that a Virginia Mortuary Affairs Unit would be deploying to New York City to help with the handling of human remains. This is from Epoch Times. And you all may remember I reported that NBC News had this article claiming that the U.S. Intelligence Department had alerted the Trump administration very early on that this virus was spreading in China. The Pentagon has now come out to deny this report. I should correct something too. The original report, at least in media side, was ABC, not NBC. NBC did report on it. Original report appears to be from ABC. Long story short, they had cited anonymous sources claiming that the Trump administration was alerted of the, through this intelligence report of this virus spreading through China. It notes, however, that Trump himself, in his own personal briefings, was not alerted till January. That report was based on unnamed sources. It's unclear whether any of this was true. And now the Pentagon is coming out and saying the whole thing was fake. Now, Shane Day, director of the NCMI, said in a statement, quote, "As a matter of practice, the National Center for Medical Intelligence does not comment publicly on specific intelligence matters. However, in the interest of transparency during the current public health crisis, we can confirm that the media reporting about the existence/release of a National Center for Medical Intelligence coronavirus-related product/assessment in November 2019 is not correct. No such NCMI product exists." In other words, fake news. And of course, as I mentioned last time, the deeper context of this is that Adam Schiff has been calling into investigations into the Trump administration on whether Trump has been properly handling this virus based on the information he has. And so this article, of course, raised the question that if Trump, was alerted early on, then why did he not respond better? Turns out that was all fake news. And lastly, Attorney General William Barr has come out against a proposal by Bill Gates that would require people to have certificates for being vaccinated against the CCP virus. This is from Epoch Times. Now, Barr said, quote, "I'm very concerned about the slippery slope in terms of continuing encroachments on personal liberty. I do think during the emergency, appropriate, reasonable steps are fine." Now, that said, folks, really appreciate your support. If you haven't seen it yet, again, check out the documentary we did. I think you'll all really enjoy it. Looking into the origin of this virus. You can find it in our video section on this page. And of course, please remember to like and subscribe. We really need your support. Also, if you're on YouTube, click the notification bell. You'll get alerts when our new videos are up. We'll be doing these broadcasts Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in. We're focusing right now heavily on this new coronavirus, the CCP virus. And of course, if you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section. I do read them. And on Mondays, I'll be answering some questions. Of course, thank you all. See you next time.